Hello, survivors. Thank you for taking the time to listen to the story. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe to our channel. We appreciate it, and thank you in advance. Please leave the name of the city you're listening from in the comment section below. It helps us see our reach in the community. Let's start the story. My name's Logan Swan, and I'm probably the only guy in Dallas who woke up this morning planning to clean the cannon bore on a Soviet-era T-72 tank. The irony isn't lost on me now. It was 7:30 a.m. when I started the maintenance routine in my rented warehouse space on the outskirts of the industrial district. The T-72 sat there like a sleeping metal beast, all 41 tons of composite armor and steel track links. I'd bought her from a military surplus auction 3 years ago. Decommissioned, they said. Demilitarized, they promised. They lied about the demilitarized part. I run a specialty business. Film crews, collectors, military enthusiasts with deep pockets. They all want the authentic experience of being around real armor. The T-72 was my bread and butter. Soviet engineering at its finest, built to survive nuclear war and keep rolling. Today she was scheduled for a static display at a military expo in Fort Worth. The first sign something was wrong came at 8:47 a.m. I was inside the driver's compartment checking fluid levels when every emergency siren in the city started wailing at once. Not the monthly test. This was different. Overlapping frequencies, multiple agencies, the kind of cacophony that makes your teeth ache. Through the thick steel hull, the sound was muffled but persistent. I climbed up through the commander's hatch and looked out across the city skyline. Black smoke pillars rose from at least 6 different locations. A news helicopter circled one of the fires. But even from this distance, something about its flight pattern looked erratic. My radio scanner crackled to life. Police frequencies first. All units respond to multiple 1054s downtown. Repeat, multiple casualty incidents. The transmission cut to static. Emergency medical services next. We need backup at Presbyterian Hospital. Something's wrong with the patients. They're attacking the staff. Static again. Then military frequencies, encrypted channels I wasn't supposed to be able to monitor. Containment protocol Charlie is compromised. Repeat, we have multiple breaches. The hairs on my arms stood up. Containment protocol. Breaches. In 15 years of military contracting, I'd heard that terminology exactly twice. Both times people died in large numbers. I slammed the commander's hatch shut and dropped back into the tank. Muscle memory kicked in as I went through startup procedures I hadn't used since my last contract in Syria. Main power on, engine preheat initiated. Communications array active. Defensive systems, well, the ones that still worked, online. The V12 diesel engine turned over with a throaty rumble that vibrated through my bones. She purred like a mechanical tiger, all 7 to 80 horsepower of Soviet reliability. I'd kept her in better condition than most active duty tanks. Call it professional pride. Through the driver's periscope, I watched a police cruiser speed past my warehouse, emergency lights flashing. The officer inside was talking rapidly into his radio, head swiveling like he expected threats from every direction. Behind him, a civilian pickup truck followed at dangerous speed, bed loaded with suitcases and crying children. People were running. I switched to the thermal imaging system, another modification I'd made that wasn't strictly legal. The display showed heat signatures moving through the industrial complex. Too many, too fast. Some moved in normal human patterns, but others moved wrong, herky-jerky like broken marionettes. At 9:15 a.m., I saw my first infected person. She came stumbling around the corner of the warehouse across from mine, mid-30s, wearing a blood-soaked nurse's uniform. At first glance, she looked like a car accident victim seeking help. Then I noticed her gait. She didn't walk. She lurched forward with mechanical persistence, arms swinging loose at her sides. Her head tilted at an angle that should have caused neck pain, but she showed no sign of discomfort. When she passed under a streetlight, I caught a glimpse of her face through the periscope. Her jaw hung slack, lower teeth visible in a permanent grimace. Dark fluid. Blood, I realized, had dried in streaks down her chin and neck. But her eyes moved with mechanical scanning patterns, like a security camera sweeping for motion. No intelligence behind them, no recognition, just primitive sensory tracking. A stray dog wandered into her field of vision. She turned toward it with sudden, violent motion. The dog bolted and she gave chase with surprising speed. Not a run, more like a controlled stumble at high velocity. She moved like gravity was pulling her forward and her legs were just trying to keep up. The dog escaped around a corner. The woman, former woman, stood there for a moment, swaying slightly. Then her head turned in a slow arc, scanning automatically for new movement to pursue, like a broken motion detector. That's when I understood this wasn't a medical emergency. This was a biological incident. I'd seen enough field reports about chemical weapons to recognize some of the signs. Compromised higher brain functions, retention of basic motor skills, heightened aggression focused on moving targets. But the specific cause was anyone's guess. Either way, I was sitting in the best possible place to ride it out. The T-72's armor could stop armor-piercing rounds. Whatever was happening to people out there, it couldn't get through 6 inches of composite steel. I had enough diesel fuel for maybe 200 miles of operation. The main gun was loaded with a high explosive shell, technically illegal, but I'd kept a few practice rounds from my contracting days. The coaxial machine gun had a full belt of 7.62mm ammunition. I should have stayed put. Locked down the warehouse, waited for the military to contain whatever this was. But at 9:42 a.m., I heard screaming, human screaming, close by. Through the commander's periscope, I tracked the sound to the auto repair shop 2 blocks north. A man in mechanic's coveralls was trapped on top of a car, swinging a tire iron at 3 infected people below. They clawed at the vehicle's sides with repetitive motions, leaving bloody handprints on the paint. The mechanic was tiring. His swings were getting slower, less accurate. I had 2 choices: watch him die, or do something about it. The T-72's engine roared as I engaged the transmission. 41 tons of armored vehicle lurched forward, crushing the warehouse's thin metal door like tissue paper. The morning sun hit my vision blocks as I steered toward the repair shop, track links chewing up asphalt with metallic grinding sounds. The infected heard me coming. All 3 turned away from the trapped mechanic, drawn by the diesel engine noise. They moved toward my tank with primitive automatic responses. No fear, no hesitation, just stimulus and reaction. I stopped 20 meters away and activated the external speaker system, another modification for film work. "Get clear," I broadcast to the mechanic. He didn't need to be told twice. As soon as the infected moved toward my tank, he jumped down from the car and sprinted toward a nearby building. The 3 infected reached the T-72 and began clawing at the front armor with their fingernails. The sound was like chalk on a blackboard, amplified through the steel hull. They showed no fear, no self-preservation instinct, just single-minded focus on reaching whatever was inside. I traversed the turret 90 degrees and activated the coaxial machine gun. 3 short bursts, precisely aimed. The 7.62mm rounds dropped all 3 infected with efficient headshots. Their bodies crumpled to the asphalt, finally still. The mechanic peered out from his hiding spot, staring at the tank in obvious amazement. He approached carefully, hands raised to show he wasn't armed. "You okay in there?" he called out. "Fine," I replied through the speaker. "What happened to them?" "Don't know, man. Started about an hour ago. People just changed. Got violent, real violent." He gestured toward downtown. "Emergency broadcasts say it's happening everywhere. Military's supposed to be setting up some kind of safe zone." "Where?" "Interstate 35 bridge, north side. They're evacuating people by convoy." That made tactical sense. The bridge was a natural choke point, easily defensible. If this infection was spreading through direct contact, controlling access routes would be critical. "Can you make it there on foot?" I asked. He nodded. "Think so. Streets are pretty clear between here and there." "Then go, stay off main roads. Move quiet." The mechanic started jogging north, keeping to alleyways and side streets. Smart man. I should have followed his example and headed straight for the bridge. Should have linked up with military forces and waited for proper containment. Instead, I heard more screaming. This time from the south, near the residential area. I turned the T-72 around and rolled toward the sound, steel tracks crushing abandoned cars that blocked my path. The tank's weight advantage meant I could go anywhere, through fences, over curbs, straight through buildings if necessary. The screaming led me to a small strip mall, where a crowd of maybe 30 infected had surrounded a group of survivors barricaded inside a pharmacy. The infected pressed against the storefront windows, leaving bloody smears on the glass as they clawed and pushed. Inside, I could see at least 8 people, adults, no children visible, huddled behind an overturned counter. They'd blocked the door with a heavy display rack, but it was starting to give way under the pressure from outside. The infected were packed tight against the building. Perfect target for the main gun. I aimed the 125mm cannon at the far end of the crowd, away from the pharmacy entrance. The high explosive shell would create a kill radius of about 15 meters. Messy, but effective. The cannon blast was deafening even through the tank's sound insulation. The shell detonated among the infected with a thunderclap that shattered every window in a 2-block radius. Bodies and body parts scattered across the parking lot in a spray of concrete dust and organic debris. The survivors stumbled out of the pharmacy, ears bleeding from the blast but very much alive. One of them, a woman in a medical uniform, approached the tank cautiously. "Thank you," she called out. "We thought we were dead." "Military's evacuating at the I-35 bridge," I broadcast. "North side. Can you make it?" "We've got 2 wounded. Can't move fast." I considered the tactical situation. The explosion would attract more infected. They seemed drawn to loud sounds. Moving wounded survivors on foot through city streets would be slow and dangerous. But I couldn't take them inside the tank. That would compromise my security, my mobility, my survival. "I'll escort you," I decided. "Stay behind the tank. Keep up as best you can." The woman nodded and gathered the other survivors. 2 men supported a wounded companion between them, while the rest formed a loose group behind the T-72. I engaged the transmission and started rolling north at walking pace, using the tank's bulk to crush abandoned vehicles out of the way. The survivors followed in my wake, stepping through the cleared path. We'd made it maybe 6 blocks when the first wave hit us. They came from the east, maybe 40 infected drawn by the cannon blast, more aggressive, like the sound of high explosives had triggered some kind of feeding response. I traversed the turret and opened up with the coaxial machine gun, hosing down the approaching crowd with disciplined bursts. Bodies dropped, but more kept coming. They stepped over their fallen companions without hesitation, focused entirely on reaching the living targets behind my tank. "Move faster," I broadcast to the survivors, but they couldn't. The wounded were slowing everyone down, and the infected were gaining ground. I made a command decision and backed the T-72 into the intersection, using the tank's bulk to block the infected advance. Steel tracks crushed bone and flesh as I positioned the vehicle between the threats and the survivors. "Go around," I ordered. "Keep moving north." The survivors scattered around my flanks while I held the intersection with machine gun fire. The infected threw themselves against the tank's armor, clawing and biting at steel that could stop anti-tank rounds. Some tried to climb onto the hull. I activated the tank's NBC overpressure system, venting exhaust fumes through the external vents. The superheated diesel exhaust discouraged most climbers, but a few persistent ones required individual attention from the commander's machine gun. When the intersection was clear, I rolled forward to catch up with the survivors. They'd made good time. The wounded man was being carried now, which doubled their speed. We encountered 3 more groups of infected during the 2-mile journey to the bridge. Each engagement followed the same pattern. I'd position the tank between threats and civilians, suppress the infected with machine gun fire, then escort the survivors through the cleared area. By the time we reached the military perimeter, I'd expended most of my coaxial ammunition and half my fuel, but all 8 survivors made it alive. The bridge was a fortress. Military vehicles formed defensive positions at both ends, with razor wire and sandbag emplacements channeling civilian traffic through controlled checkpoints. Soldiers in full chemical protection gear processed evacuees, while Apache helicopters circled overhead. A young lieutenant approached my tank as I rolled up to the perimeter. "Sir, I need you to dismount for processing." he called through a bullhorn. "Negative," I replied through the external speaker. "This vehicle is my safe zone." The lieutenant consulted with his sergeant, then returned. "Sir, we can't allow armored vehicles past the checkpoint without proper authorization." "Then I'll stay here and provide fire support." That got their attention. A captain jogged over and climbed onto the tank's fender to speak directly through the commander's hatch. "You military?" he asked. "Former contractor. This is my tank." "Registered?" I laughed, though it came out bitter through the speaker. "Captain, half the people in this city just tried to eat the other half. You really want to discuss paperwork right now?" He considered that for a moment. "Fair point. What kind of support can you provide?" "I've got main gun ammunition and enough fuel for maybe 6 hours of operation. Coaxial's nearly empty, but I can reload if you've got 7.62 belts." "We do." He gestured toward a supply truck. "What do you need?" "Information, mostly. How widespread is this? What's the military response?" The captain's expression darkened. "It's bad, really bad. Started this morning around 0800, spreading fast. CDC doesn't know what they're dealing with yet." "Any idea what caused it?" "Nobody knows. Could be anything at this point." He gestured toward downtown. "But we've lost contact with CENTCOM. National Guard units are falling back to defensible positions. Orders are to evacuate as many civilians as possible, then pull back to secondary containment lines. In other words, they were abandoning the cities." "How long before you withdraw?" I asked. "Convoy leaves at 1400 hours, last truck, no exceptions." I checked my chronometer, 11:30 a.m., 2.5 hours. "I'm going back," I decided. "Back where?" "Into the city. There are still people alive in there." The captain stared at me through the vision block. "Sir, that's suicide. We've got reports of infected massing downtown in groups of thousands. Whatever's causing this, it's making them more organized. Then those people are going to need all the help they can get." I started the engine and backed away from the checkpoint. The captain jumped down from the tank as I turned around. "If you change your mind," he called out, "we'll have ammunition waiting." I rolled back toward the city center, leaving safety behind. The smart play was to stay with the military, get evacuated to whatever secure location they'd established outside the infection zone. Ride this out in government protection until the situation stabilized. But I couldn't get the image out of my head. That mechanic on top of the car swinging his tire iron while death clawed at him from below. Somewhere in Dallas, more people were making that same last stand. And I had a tank. At 12:15 p.m., as I rolled past abandoned suburbs toward downtown, I realized I was probably going to die in this metal coffin. The fuel wouldn't last forever. Neither would the ammunition. Eventually, I'd have to choose between staying mobile and staying alive. But for now, I had both. The radio crackled with desperate voices calling for help from locations throughout the city. An office building on Commerce Street, an apartment complex near the university, a medical clinic that had become an impromptu refugee center. I turned toward downtown, where the smoke pillars were thickest. Time to see what 41 tons of Soviet armor could do against the end of the world. The city looked different when I rolled back in at 12:30 p.m. What had been scattered chaos 6 hours ago was now systematic devastation. Entire blocks burned unchecked, sending thick columns of black smoke into the October sky. Abandoned vehicles clustered at intersections where panicked drivers had collided and fled on foot. The infected moved in loose clusters now, drawn together by sounds and movement like iron filings to a magnet. Through the commander's periscope, I watched a group of maybe 20 infected shuffle down Main Street in a ragged line. When one stumbled over debris, the others didn't stop to help. They simply walked around the fallen body and continued forward. My radio scanner picked up fragments of desperate transmissions. "Barricaded in the courthouse, 3rd floor, we've got maybe 24 people here. Medical center is overrun. Repeat, Baylor is gone. Do not attempt rescue. Anyone out there? Please respond. We're trapped in the Wells Fargo building." I chose the courthouse first. Downtown Dallas, 10 blocks from my current position. The building was defensible, and 20 survivors was manageable for escort duty. The T-72's tracks chewed through abandoned cars as I navigated toward the government district. Every few blocks, infected would hear the diesel engine and turn toward me with that automatic head swivel motion. Some tried to chase the tank, stumbling along until they lost sight of me around corners. A few managed to grab onto the rear hull as I passed, but 41 tons of momentum isn't something you stop with fingernails. They held on until their grip failed, then tumbled away across the asphalt. The courthouse sat on a raised plaza surrounded by concrete steps. Good defensive terrain. I could see infected milling around the base of the building, maybe 30 or 40 of them. They'd gathered there because something had attracted them, probably the survivors themselves. I positioned the tank at the bottom of the plaza steps and activated the external speaker. "Courthouse survivors, this is your ride out. When I clear the area, you have 30 seconds to reach the street level." The main gun traverse sounded like grinding metal as I aimed the 125mm cannon at the center of the infected cluster. High explosive round loaded. Range, point blank. The blast turned the courthouse steps into a crater of concrete dust and organic debris. The concussion shattered every window on the first 3 floors of the building. Infected bodies, or what remained of them, scattered across the plaza like broken dolls. The few infected who'd been on the edges of the blast zone stumbled around in circles, their internal navigation systems damaged by the concussion. They moved in tight spirals, bumping into walls and debris without any apparent awareness of their surroundings. A side door of the courthouse burst open and survivors began streaming out. I counted them through the periscope. 18 adults, moving fast but organized. Someone inside had taken charge and planned this evacuation. They reached street level in 22 seconds. "Form up behind the tank," I broadcast. "Stay in my track marks. We're heading north to the military checkpoint." The escort run should have been routine. 5 miles through mostly residential areas to reach the I-35 bridge. Keep the tank between threats and civilians. Suppress anything that got too close. Deliver the package safely. The survivors behind my tank maintained good spacing and noise discipline. They'd learned fast that sound attracted unwanted attention. It went wrong 3 blocks from the courthouse. The infected had been gathering downtown all morning, drawn by the sounds of combat and human activity. What I encountered wasn't the scattered individuals I'd been dealing with earlier. It was a river of bodies flowing down Commerce Street like a tide of death. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. They filled the street from sidewalk to sidewalk, a shuffling mass of blood-stained clothing and slack faces that stretched for blocks. The sight was mesmerizing in its horror, an ocean of humanity that had lost everything that made it human. They moved as one organism, responding to the same basic stimuli, but without coordination or communication. When they heard the T-72's engine, the entire crowd turned toward us with synchronized head movements that made my skin crawl. Hundreds of eyes focused on our position. Their mouths hung open, black fluid dripping from their chins onto their chests. The sound they made wasn't quite a moan, more like the wind through a broken window, multiplied by hundreds of voices. It rose and fell in waves as more infected joined the crowd, drawn by the noise of their companions. "Contact front," I announced through the speaker. "Massive concentration, at least 500 targets." The survivors behind me stopped moving. Through the rear-facing camera, I could see them staring at the approaching horde with the kind of paralyzed terror that gets people killed. "Keep moving," I ordered. "I'll handle this." I couldn't use the main gun. The survivors were too close and the blast would kill them along with the infected. The coaxial machine gun would work, but I'd burn through ammunition fast trying to stop that many targets. Time for a different approach. I shifted the transmission into high gear and accelerated directly into the infected crowd. The T-72's 41 tons of mass became a battering ram, moving at 20 miles per hour. Bodies disappeared under the tracks with wet crunching sounds that vibrated through the hull like a horrific percussion section. The tank's steel wedge-shaped front slope deflected infected bodies to either side, creating a corridor of destruction down the center of Commerce Street. The impact sounds were nauseating. Wet impacts mixed with the crack of breaking bones and the screech of metal against concrete. Some tried to grab onto the hull as I passed. but the T-72's smooth armor gave them nothing to grip. Their fingernails left scratches on the paint, but couldn't find purchase on the sloped surfaces. Through the driver's periscope, I watched infected bodies pile up against the tank's front slope like snow before a plow. The tank's weight advantage meant I could push through almost anything, but the psychological impact of crushing human forms, even infected ones, was something no training had prepared me for. I plowed through the center of the horde, tracks pulverizing everything in my path. The tank's drivetrain groaned under the load of processing so much organic matter, but Soviet engineering had built these machines to operate in any conditions. Behind me, the survivors ran through the cleared corridor, stepping over pieces of infected bodies that the tank had scattered like grotesque confetti. The whole engagement lasted maybe 90 seconds, but it felt like hours. When I reached the far end of Commerce Street, my tracks were slick with blood and organic matter, creating a metallic grinding sound as bone fragments caught in the drive sprockets. The tank's external equipment was splattered with dark fluids that I tried not to think about too closely. "Status report," I called to the survivors through the external speaker. "All present," came the reply. A woman's voice, steady despite everything she'd just witnessed. Professional, maybe medical or emergency services background. That was effective. Her tone carried a mixture of gratitude and horror that I'd become familiar with during my contracting years. People were always glad to be saved, but they didn't always like the methods required for their salvation. We made the rest of the journey without major incident. A few individual infected tried to intercept us, but single targets were easy to handle with precise machine gun bursts. By 1:45 p.m., I was delivering 18 live civilians to the military checkpoint. The same captain from earlier jogged over as the survivors were processed through the security line. "Good work," he said, climbing onto the tank's fender. "But that's the last group we can take. Convoy's leaving in 15 minutes. I've got time for one more run." "Negative. We're at capacity, and the situation downtown is deteriorating fast. Our reconnaissance drones show infected massing in groups of thousands. Whatever's causing this, it's getting worse." I checked my fuel gauge. Half full. Ammunition status: 3 main gun rounds, 1 belt of machine gun ammo. Enough for maybe one more rescue operation. "Where's the next distress call?" The captain hesitated, then pulled out a tactical radio and tuned to the emergency frequency. Static filled the channel, then a desperate voice broke through. "Anyone receiving? This is Dr. Vincent Fisher at Dallas Methodist Hospital. We've got 43 medical staff and patients trapped on the 7th floor. Building is surrounded, maybe 300 infected in the lobby and stairwells. We can't get out. Please, someone respond. Methodist Hospital. Methodist. 12 blocks south of downtown, right in the heart of the infection zone." "That's a death trap," the captain said. "Hospital's been overrun since this morning. No way you can extract 43 people from a 7-story building with infected on every floor." He was right. The tactical situation was impossible, even if I could clear the building, which would require more ammunition than I had. Moving 43 people through city streets crawling with infected was suicide. But Dr. Fisher's voice still crackled over the radio, growing more desperate with each transmission. "Sir, I need an answer here," the captain pressed. "Convoy leaves in 10 minutes. Last chance to evacuate." I looked through the periscope at the stream of refugees boarding military trucks, families with children, elderly couples helping each other walk, people who'd survived the worst morning of their lives and were now heading to safety. Then I looked south, toward the smoke pillars rising from downtown Dallas. "Tell the convoy to leave without me." "Sir, those people in the hospital are counting on someone to try. Might as well be someone with a tank." The captain stared at me through the vision block for a long moment. Then he climbed down from the fender and walked toward a supply truck. He returned with 2 belts of 7.62mm ammunition and a case of high-explosive shells. "This is all the spare ammo we can give you," he said. "Make it count." I loaded the machine gun belts and secured the artillery shells in the turret rack. The T-72 now carried enough firepower to level a city block. It still wouldn't be enough. At 2:05 p.m., I watched the military convoy disappear over the horizon, leaving me alone in a dead city with a hospital full of people depending on me to save them. The drive to Methodist Hospital took 40 minutes through streets that looked like a war zone. Burned-out cars, bodies in various states of decay, buildings with their windows smashed and doors hanging open. The infected were everywhere now, moving in larger groups. I counted at least 6 separate clusters of 50 or more, all shambling through the city with that same automatic movement pattern. They didn't coordinate or communicate. They just followed basic stimulus response programming that drew them toward heat, sound, and motion. Methodist Hospital came into view at 2:45 p.m., and I immediately understood why the military had written it off as unsalvageable. The building was a fortress under siege, surrounded by what could only be described as a sea of infected humanity. Infected packed the parking lot, the lobby, the emergency entrance, everywhere I could see through the commander's periscope. They pressed against the building's exterior walls in dense masses, clawing at windows and doors with repetitive motions that had worn grooves in the concrete and metal. The main entrance was completely blocked by a wall of bodies maybe 10 deep. The infected in front had been crushed against the glass doors by the pressure from behind, their faces flattened against the transparent surface in grotesque masks. Ground floor windows were spiderwebbed with cracks from constant impact, and I could see infected moving inside the building through the broken glass like ants in a disturbed colony. The sound was overwhelming even through the tank's sound insulation. Hundreds of voices making that broken wind noise, punctuated by the rhythmic pounding of fists against glass and metal. It was the sound of mindless hunger given physical form. This wasn't a rescue mission, this was recovery of the dead. But Dr. Fisher's voice still crackled over the radio, fainter now, but still transmitting. 7th floor, East Wing, we can see a tank in the parking lot, please respond. They were alive. Somehow they'd held out for 6 hours in a building crawling with infected. I had to try. The hospital's parking structure was partially collapsed, blocking vehicle access from the north. But the emergency entrance faced a wide, circular drive that gave me room to maneuver. I positioned the T-72 50 meters from the main entrance and loaded a high-explosive round. Methodist Hospital, this is Tank Commander Swan. I broadcast on the emergency frequency. I'm going to clear the lobby with artillery. When you hear the explosion, you have 5 minutes to reach the stairwell. Can you make it to ground level? Negative, Dr. Fisher replied immediately. Infected control floors 1 through 6. Stairwell is blocked. What about the roof? Access door is locked from the outside. Security measure. I studied the building through the thermal imaging system. 7 floors, multiple stairwells, dozens of rooms where infected could be hiding. Even if I cleared the lobby, the moment those survivors left the 7th floor, they'd run into infected throughout the building. This was impossible, but I'd come this far. Doctor, is there any other way off that floor? Service elevator? Fire escape? There's a maintenance ladder in the mechanical room. Leads to the roof access, but we'd need someone to unlock the roof door from outside. Where's the roof access? North side of the building. Metal door marked with a red cross. I could reach the roof using the tank's external ladder system. Climb up, unlock the door, provide covering fire while the survivors descended the maintenance ladder to ground level. It meant leaving the tank. For the first time in 8 hours, I'd be outside the armor, exposed and vulnerable. Give me 10 minutes, I told Dr. Fisher. I drove around to the north side of the building, crushing infected under the tracks as I maneuvered through the parking lot. The roof was maybe 15 feet above ground level, within reach if I climbed onto the turret and used the external equipment rack as a ladder. The infected noticed my movement and began converging on the tank's position. Not running. They didn't seem capable of that level of coordination, but walking toward the source of noise and vibration. I had maybe 3 minutes before they surrounded my position completely. I opened the commander's hatch and climbed out onto the turret for the first time since this nightmare began. The October air hit my face, carrying the smell of smoke, blood, and something else. Decay. The city was starting to rot. The roof access door was exactly where Dr. Hayes had described it. I jumped from the turret onto the hospital's roof, landed hard, and ran to the metal door. It was secured with a simple deadbolt that turned easily. The door swung open, revealing a dark stairwell that smelled like disinfectant and fear. "Dr. Fisher, roof access is clear," I broadcast through my portable radio. "Bring your people up." "Copy that, we're moving now." I ran back to the roof edge and looked down at my tank. Infected had surrounded it completely, maybe 200 of them, pressing against the armor with their clawed hands. They couldn't damage the T-72, but they'd make it difficult to get back inside. The first survivors appeared at the roof access door, a man in a doctor's coat, followed by a woman in surgical scrubs. Then more medical staff moving in small groups. "How many?" I called. 41, Dr. Fisher replied. 2 didn't make it to the stairwell. 41 people. Too many to escort through infected controlled streets. Too many to fit inside the tank's crew compartment. And the military convoy was long gone. I helped the last survivor onto the roof and sealed the access door behind them. Through the hospital windows below, I could see infected moving through the corridors, drawn by the sound of our escape route. "What's the plan?" Dr. Fisher asked. I looked out across the city. Smoke pillars rose from a dozen locations. The interstate bridges were empty. The military had withdrawn completely. No helicopters in the sky. No rescue vehicles on the streets. We were alone in a dead city with no way out. "The tank can't carry all of you," I admitted. "And there's nowhere to take you anyway. Military's gone." The survivors absorbed this information with the kind of stunned silence that comes after hope dies. "So what do we do?" a nurse asked. I climbed down from the hospital roof using a maintenance ladder on the building's exterior. The infected at ground level noticed my movement and began shambling toward my position, but I reached the tank's hull before they could intercept me. The T-72's armor was covered with bloody handprints where the infected had been clawing at it. They damaged some of the external equipment, radio antennas bent, vision blocks scratched, but nothing that would affect the tank's basic operation. I climbed through the commander's hatch and sealed it behind me. The familiar hum of electronics and diesel engines surrounded me like a steel cocoon. "Methodist Hospital survivors," I broadcast through the external speaker. "I'm going to clear you a path to the parking structure. There should be vehicles there you can use to get out of the city. Head north to the county line." It was a lie. The parking structure was probably full of abandoned cars with dead batteries and empty fuel tanks. Even if they found working vehicles, the highways were clogged with abandoned traffic. But it was the only hope I could give them. I drove the T-72 in a wide circle around the hospital, crushing infected under the tracks and drawing the crowd away from the building. The tank's diesel engine roared as I accelerated through clusters of infected, their bodies disappearing under the steel tracks with sounds I was getting tired of hearing. When I'd cleared a corridor to the parking structure, I broadcast the all-clear signal. Through the rear-facing camera, I watched 41 medical professionals run across the hospital roof, down emergency ladders, and into the parking structure. Some looked back at the tank as they disappeared into the shadows, expressions of gratitude mixed with something else. Maybe pity. They understood that I was choosing to stay behind in a dead city while they searched for escape routes. Dr. Fisher paused at the entrance to the parking structure and raised his hand in a brief salute before vanishing into the darkness. It was the last human gesture I would see for hours. I never saw them again. Whether they found working vehicles, whether they made it out of the city, whether they survived the highways clogged with abandoned traffic, I'll never know. But at least I'd given them a chance, which was more than anyone else was getting in Dallas that day. At 4:30 p.m., I was alone in the city center, surrounded by thousands of infected and running on fumes. The T-72's fuel gauge showed less than a quarter tank, maybe 2 hours of operation if I kept moving, less if I had to engage in high-intensity combat. The radio was silent now, except for automated emergency broadcasts that cycled through the same useless information every 10 minutes. No more distress calls from trapped civilians. No military transmissions. Just static and the occasional burst of computer-generated warnings that no one was monitoring anymore. The silence was almost worse than the desperate voices had been. At least the distress calls meant people were still fighting, still hoping for rescue. Now there was nothing but the hum of emergency systems broadcasting to an empty city. I drove slowly through downtown Dallas, looking for signs of life among the wandering infected. The tank's thermal imaging showed heat signatures everywhere, but they were all the wrong temperature. Infected bodies ran cooler than living humans. Their metabolism slowed by whatever process had changed them. The infected followed in loose clusters, drawn by the engine noise but unable to keep pace with the tank's movement. They trailed behind me like a parade of the dead. At 5:15 p.m., I reached the I-35 bridge where the military had established their evacuation point. The checkpoint was abandoned, sandbags scattered, razor wire cut, equipment left behind in neat piles. But they'd left something for me. A supply cache sat next to the abandoned command post. Ammunition boxes, fuel cans, and a handwritten note weighted down with a rock. Tank Commander Swan, in case you make it back. Good luck. Captain Ortiz. I refueled the T-72 and loaded the spare ammunition. Enough supplies for maybe 12 more hours of operation. The bridge stretched out ahead of me, leading north toward whatever safe zone the military had established. I could follow their route, catch up with the convoy, spend whatever time remained in government protection. But behind me, the city burned, and somewhere in that urban wasteland, people were still alive, still fighting, still calling for help on radio frequencies that no one else was monitoring. I turned the tank around and headed back into Dallas. The fuel wouldn't last forever. Neither would the ammunition. Eventually, I'd have to choose between staying mobile and staying alive. But for now, I had both. And I had a job to do. At 6 p.m. on what I was already thinking of as the last day of the old world, I drove my Soviet tank into the heart of darkness, hunting for anyone still worth saving. The infected followed in my wake like broken children, stumbling through their own ruins, unaware that their world had ended and mine was just beginning.